Thanks for joining today, guys. We really appreciate you coming in. So yesterday, David had this crazy speech about the long-term vision of Expensify, like tens, hundreds of years, multiple planets, Mars. It was super exciting. This is not going to be that at all, like even close. But what we want to talk about is the more immediate focus, because I think we've sort of missed that gap with everyone working on chat. Like, how do we actually get to one app? How do we move forward today in the immediate term? And that's with this buzzword called reunification, which you may or may not have heard of. So we want to actually define this for you all today.
Oh, and actually, one thing to note is like you'll hear people say new dot and old dot. It's just like Expensify lingo, like new dot refers to new.expensify.com. We actually don't have an old dot, but it's just the opposite of new, so that's why we say old dot. It's the old platform.
Very straightforward. So before we get into it, just quick introductions. This is Jason Mills. He's already presented, so I'm sure you're familiar with him.
Yep.
He's our Chief Product Officer. He's been at Expensify for about 100 years.
And
my name is Kevin Sullivan. I've worked on both the sales and the product side. I've been at Expensify for about 6.5 years.
long time.
Also a long time.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about financial collaboration, and specifically the fact that, right, like around financial transactions, there are conversations, but we haven't really done that much to give you an insight on, like, we can probably understand this for personal, but like, how the heck does this actually work in a business context? So let's kind of run you through some cases. First, again, it all starts with having fun. Having fun is the easy part. That's what we do in Discord. That's what we do in iMessage, WhatsApp, whatever. We can all understand this. Very easy.
Yeah, and then from there, it goes from shared experiences to shared expenses, right? This is also pretty familiar in the consumer case. You go out for a trip, you're planning it, you might split a bill, spot someone at a bar, et cetera. So it's still a pretty basic concept, but the key differences here is you're actually layering on requests and sending money and actually splitting bills.
Now we're getting a little bit more serious, right? It's time to get shit done. And so that necessitates, right, maybe as an example, you have your side hustle, right? Maybe actually for people in this room, Expensify is their side hustle. And that kind of necessitates effectively like the need to have personal conversations and things you do with your friends or your roommates, right? And now things you do with your colleagues or your business partners, right? And that might be not only conversations, maybe that might be, as an example, like sharing an invoice from your side hustle, perhaps to Expensify, right? Requesting money for fixing a bug.
So now business is booming. You've probably jumped into a full-time gig. Maybe you're hiring people, you're scaling quickly. And as those things happen, things get more complicated. Like the tools become more important, both financially and on the collaboration side. Frankly, as you're growing quickly, you're hiring people you're not that familiar with, and so financial controls become more important. It's a lower trust environment than just you and your friend or your co-founder. And additionally, collaboration becomes critical. We've all seen it at Expensify. We need a great tool to collaborate with in order to push the business forward.
Maybe you get big, actually. Maybe you IPO. Maybe you're a public company. Maybe you get a super shitty boss that asks for TP reports and all this stuff that you just don't even care about, right? And that actually also necessitates the need for, you have multi-entity, you have multi-currency, you have all these things that you just didn't have before. And that also necessitates the need to have reporting, compliance, but they all build on top of the same foundation.
Yeah, so if we bring it all together, this is really that life cycle that we've just talked through, from the individual, the consumer case, all the way up to that public company. And in fact, Expensify has been through this exact life cycle. And while there are like plenty of nuances and complexities within each of these cases, that's really been our specialty, is to specialize in these nuances and cater to different types of users and businesses. When you zoom out, it's all about having conversations, planning, executing, and transactions. It's very similar throughout.
And so perhaps the question becomes, okay, so how does this map to reunification, right? And what's kind of interesting, it's basically all the stuff you haven't seen so far. Like, all you've seen is chat, the ability to request money, but you'll notice there was a bubble here. That's not the focus of reunification. It's the side hustle, the startup, right? The small business, maybe your intergalactic business as well, eventually, 100 years, whatever it happens to be. Like, that's what the next 2 years are gonna be all about.
Yeah, so how are we gonna pull this off? You've probably, I know internal folks have heard this probably too many times, external people too. We have this thing called a newsletter. And I'd like to just define that key term because it will continue to come up over time. In short, a newsletter is an email we send to 12 million users. So everyone that's a user on Expensify, we send them an email. Now what we do with that email is we're trying to send this cohesive message and narrative about where we're going as a business, right? So it needs to make sense to literally everyone. But at the same time, we're trying to carve out like a smaller scope. Like this is a huge amount of work to get done. And if we just wait to get it all done, it's gonna take us forever. So we'll carve out a smaller case, maybe like a specific case of users, and then we'll cater that message to them. And the benefit is really twofold. The first is we get to actually get feedback quicker. So instead of waiting until this entire thing is done and launching it, we can talk to immediate customers for a specific case, figure out what's working, what's not, iterate from there. Then the next part is just we get to gradually upgrade in complexity. So we started with chat on NewDot, right? Because that's like, it's not easy. There's a lot of bugs and stability is hard, but the actual case as a consumer is much simpler than the enterprise business. So it allows us to start at a very simple foundation, and then we just gradually build on top of that. So you're gonna see that theme across the newsletters that we have coming up.
And perhaps maybe like even to start, it's helpful to talk about scale. Like we've talked about separating like a big initiative into smaller chunks. We're talking about 12 million people, 1 million businesses. Like this is kind of a big deal. It's gonna take a lot of work. So how do we get started, right? And in fact, I would say we've already started. You can barely see it, but we've already had newsletters that basically are the product of what you see today, right? It's just the super simple use cases, the friends, right? The roommates, things like that. What we need to do next is kind of a big thing. It's literally bringing the initial use cases that we had maybe on the left there, like the side hustles, the startups. And it's kind of the foundation of everything. Like we literally can't build this house that we want to build, 3-story, whatever it happens to be, mansion. Like this is the foundation. And it all starts with what we call N7 free plan members. So what does that actually entail, right? The workspace chat, it's like, what the heck is this thing? Well, in a way, business reunification kind of like rides entirely. It lives and dies. It succeeds or fails on this thing called the workspace chat. And maybe the way to think about it is, so we have a chat room, right, for this actual presentation, for the entire conference. So the workspace chat is basically the equivalent of that for business context, right? It's that where we talked about separating your personal stuff from your business stuff. And so it's the place that you talk with your boss. It's the place that you get pulled into when your company, your startup, whatever it happens to be, invites you to Expensify. It's the place when you need to get paid back, right, from your boss. This is where they will see that. This is where they can ask you questions and you can share other information with them. So the workspace chat is pretty big. So the question is like, okay, well, what else is different about the workspace chat and specifically in 7? Big news here is more ways to basically request money. At the moment, super simple. You just request money in whatever currency amount, we pay you back, right? But kind of notice here, now we're adding a new segmented control. The segmented control brings 2 basically key functions that any user on our existing platform is using on a daily basis. First and foremost is taking a picture of a receipt. Big news, we're gonna be using Vision Camera for that, super exciting. Yeah. But then in addition, like the cool thing here is, so we'll take that picture, we have a technology called Smart Scan, we'll do a lot of server-side processing of that receipt, extract information, which is cool and very convenient for an employee, because if you wanna get paid back, in a lot of cases, you don't even wanna go through the hassle of doing this. You're like traveling, right? You're in the airport, you just wanna take a picture of a receipt, throw it away, and then you're done, right? Similarly, we're adding distance. Now this one might be mind-boggling to some people. I know for me, I still don't even comprehend why it's so popular, but the basic idea is that you're traveling for work, right? You're going from your house, you're visiting your first client, your second client, you're coming home, and you're traveling that distance for which you need to be paid back because you had gas, you used your own car, that asset depreciated. Lots of cool details here. But actually, one detail would be like, we're trying to figure out, like, do we go with Mapbox? Could we get a lot more branding juice out of that? Or do we choose Google Maps? So a lot still TBD here. So what else is happening? This one's kind of big too. The Expensify card is like, it's our biggest growth driver right now. We're making, for a revenue perspective, it's really exciting. It's also kind of exciting from a technology perspective. We control this experience end to end, which means that when a card is swiped, tapped, inserted with chip and pin, all that kind of stuff, like we are getting the transaction information immediately from the terminal. We're telling Visa in a matter of milliseconds, do we approve this, do we deny it? And we also get a bunch of metadata, right? And that's cool too. That's kind of even better than scanning a receipt because you just don't have to scan one at all. In addition, like this is a corporate card, right? Corporate cards are honestly pretty boring. But this is where a key theme really throughout our entire reunification, just making it look cooler. Like this kind of looks pretty cool, right? For a corporate card, it looks more consumery. And so that's kind of a key initiative as well. Maybe last but not least, when we talk about reunification and this first phase for free plan employees, is like bringing onboarding for the first time. Like right now, right, you download an app and it's like, what happens next? Basically nothing. And this is the first time where we can use the contextual information of actually, as an example, like knowing how you brought in. Were you brought in because your company wants you to give us your address so we can send you a physical Expensify card? Or you can start using the Expensify card immediately. So on and so forth. There's just some really cool onboarding stuff that we get to do for the first time.
Yeah, so that sums up N7, and that's really about free plan employees, which is a huge lift, and we've been working on it for quite a long time. The next step for newsletter 8 is about free plan admins. And the reason why we differentiate between the two is because an admin is essentially just a more complex version of an employee. So they might have their own card, they might have expenses, et cetera, but they actually have to go into what is usually like an admin portal and actually set up the business. So there's a lot more complexity and consideration there. So the three main objectives that we have for N8 are basically we want admins to get shit done on NewDot because today they frankly don't at all. The first step is onboarding. That's gonna be very similar. It's gonna ride on the workspace chat as well, but of course instead of like your own profile, it might be setting up your company's bank account, enabling or applying for the Expensify card is one example. Next is gonna be payments. And payments has actually been an incredibly sticky feature for Expensify for years, right? So it's like reimbursing employees, employer to employer, like business to business payments, invoices, et cetera. Now, it might not seem that complex, but on the other side of that, it really is. Like we've got different payment rails, we have different regulatory agencies to report to, different verifications for the business, the actual owner of the business, and so on. So it's gonna be very challenging on the admin side to really balance that like consumer grade effort that we put in on NewDot so far. And then lastly, it's the Expensify card. So we saw the transactions, but how do the transactions get there? Well, a small business, a very small business should be able to apply for the card. It should be incredibly simple to do. We should ask them very little information. And then it's just about like issuing the card and having a solid experience there. So how are we gonna actually pull this off? The first part I'd like to break down, this is like a card example, right? So believe it or not, we've all heard about like workspace, policy. Those are kind of one and the same. We're really in a weird transition with terms right now. But we have a workspace today. And if you have a card, like that's cool. We show you that you have a card. However, if you want to do anything, if you want to issue cards, reconcile them, change settlement, anything, we just punt you to old dot. So I don't know, I actually don't even know if you guys have seen this, but it looks different, right? And I think customers would agree it's very jarring to go from the new application, get punted to a new web page, looks like enterprise software, everything about it feels enterprise. But the thing is like this has worked really well for Expensify in the past. So before like just completely shitting on it, it caters to thousands and thousands of employees, right? Like that's what we were trying to do on Expensify, and it's done it very effectively. But now we're talking about like side hustles and contractors and a totally different segment of users trying to enable this card. They don't need all of this information, filters, toggles, et cetera. So it's like, how would we reimagine this with that like consumer grade mindset? And so it's pretty simple, right? All they really need is to be able to assign a card limit. And all of the complexity can just happen in the background. So instead of having this like separate portal, which feels very much like the enterprise admin, it just goes right through the invite flow. And we just keep card assignment like top of mind. At this last step, we're provisioning a card, we're provisioning a digital card, we're queuing up actually shipping a physical card. There's a lot that's happening, but the end user doesn't need to be, or even the admin doesn't need to be totally aware of that in this very moment. So we're trying to strip that down a bit. And that's really the theme across all of those other features. Like card is a good example because we have it ironed out pretty well. But the same goes for payments, right? If you're a small business, if it's super complex or we ask a lot of you, you're just going to churn. Same thing goes with onboarding. So we're trying to just redefine everything with that like consumer lens, but it gets progressively more challenging as we go up market.
Yeah, so we basically mostly have things mapped out to this point. This is where it starts to get super hazy, right? This is where, okay, if you look at N7 as an example, that's like, let's call it 80% planned, right? Like we really know what we're doing. We got all the flows figured out. We know the technology we're gonna use. Similarly for N8, we're pretty far along, like let's call it 25%. Like we know that part of the market really well. Now, we're still figuring it out, admittedly. So like, what does it look like going from here? Okay, it's not only hazy, it's kind of dicey, I would say. This is the part where like, we say we're going to reunify, right? And this is where we actually put our money where our mouth is, and we do what we say we're going to do, right? We're literally, for the first time, gonna have effectively one mobile app that supports all use cases. Again, 12 million people, 1 million businesses. That's just by definition of the scale, not going to be super easy. So how are we going to do it, right? Well, we call it the old App Store switcheroo. And honestly, it's kind of hard to explain what we're gonna do. But we're basically gonna take this right here, this App Store listing, Expensify. Again, used by millions of people. It has pretty good reviews, right? 4.7 average, over 120K, 1,000 reviews. It's like, people generally like this thing. So what we're gonna do is one day, their app is gonna be updated, and it's gonna be everything that we've been working on here. It's gonna be the entirely new experience.
Ta-da!
And it's gonna be dicey. Yeah, it's gonna be so smooth. No one hates change, right? And
They're
so
gonna
like,
love it.
again, we'd love your feedback, but like we kind of think this is our only option for a variety of reasons. Like we have, who's downloading this first of all? Us, clearly. We want more people to, but it doesn't have the best reviews. This one, it's got great reviews. We can weather the storm a little bit. And at the end of the day, even if people don't like change, as time goes on, they just get used to it, especially when you convince them that everything they could do before, they can still do today. It's just a matter of like buttons being called different things. New expense is now request money, and so on and so forth. So, this is the big play. The good news is when you talk about like, what's the lift we need to do at this point? What does that look like? Pretty simple, actually. So it's really coming down to two things, workflows and rules. All of this stuff is back-end business logic. It's the same, even if the front-end experience is slightly different. To give you an example of what these mean, as you move, right? We talked about ways that financial collaboration changes. Like small businesses, you have some expense, you just submit it to, honestly, the CEO, the business owner, the guy you work side by side with, right? Or the person you work side by side with. And really, as your company grows, maybe it's from the employee to their manager, to then their manager, and so on and so forth, right? Just more people need to see and technically approve it. That's what we mean by workflow. Again, mainly back-end logic. The front end is pretty simple. It's like, cool, this used to be a pay button, now it's an approve button, right? Pretty basic stuff. Similarly, on the rules side, it's like people can say, okay, well, that Uber receipt, I saw you uploaded it, but why? Like, how can I be sure, right? That this is not like a personal expense. And so I wanna make sure that you add a comment or a category and things like this. Luckily, this part is the easy part. App switcheroo, we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, so then we get into N10 where the forecast is also hazy and dicey. Because we're kind of in a similar theme. Like N7 is about the end users for the free plan, right? Basic. N8 is about the admins. Then N9 is about bringing those paid plan users, which is really important, but it's still the end user. And now we're getting into N10, which is all about bringing the actual admin functionality of our paid users to New Dot. When we say paid users, we're talking enterprise businesses, Fortune 1000 companies, CFOs, like public companies, right? So there's a lot riding on this. So of course, we'll do the old web switcheroo as well at some point. And so what that means in practice, pretty similar to the mobile app, will point Expensify.com to the new application. And that's going to be one of the more important moments in recent history for our company, because we're taking the decision makers of $150 million in revenue and putting them on this new app, and that's going to be their first impression. So if we want to keep going to Curaçao, we got to do that right. And we have a ton to do that right. Like how would we actually do that? Well, minimally, we need to have the functionality that they actually need. Like not that they want, but like table stakes functionality for enterprise, multi-entity, multi-planetary businesses. Like we need to scale up to that level. So this list could go on forever. And to be honest, we don't have it all the way figured out, but we want to just clue you in on how we're thinking about it. So a few of the key things that stand out to me: accounting integrations is one of the key value propositions that Expensify's had since its inception, or at least for the last 10 years. And that's super important for the larger businesses because that's like their source of truth. So we want to communicate with that. We want to be in sync. We absolutely have to have that in the new platform before we link them over. The advanced rules engine powers a lot of what Jason said before, identifying violations and things like that. But from the admin side, think about the complexity, right? We're talking about like if-then rules builders across merchants, card types, employees, et cetera. Making that feel very like light and simple in a workspace is going to be a huge challenge. And then the last one that really stands out to me is admin reporting and search. Because so far, everything we've worked on is just make it super simple, make it feel light, like speed things up. And it's less about efficiency and scale. But as a consumer, you're going in and you're finding that one thing. As an admin or CFO, you're going in and finding 100 things, or one thing in millions of things. And our current design just does not scale to that level at all, right? Like the workspace chat can get pretty noisy across many employees, many expenses, and so on. So these are a couple of the like philosophical challenges that we'll have as we try to balance that like consumer grade feel with catering to ultimately who's paying the bills, which is a lot of these larger businesses.
Yeah, so ultimately, there's a big effort. We got a lot of time still to go. It's also pretty ambitious. Like we talked about all these modes of financial collaboration, and like the reality is we only support one today. We need to get the other 3 over the course of the next 2 years. And maybe it's also worth noting like who else is kind of doing this? This is pretty bold. Like even take the example of like Square Block, whatever you want to refer to them now. Like they have a business, right, product that's used by retail businesses, at least across the US. And it's a completely different web and app experience, and they have their consumer business, which is Cash App. So, I mean, maybe there's other people doing it, but not to our knowledge, at least Kevin and I talking. So it's big, it's bold, it's gonna be difficult. And perhaps more importantly, like a lot of this stuff is gonna start hitting the app repo pretty soon. Within the next month, a lot of implementation is gonna be coming, and it's gonna be hard. We need to build new features. We gotta fix bugs together. So yeah, let's get to work.
And that's it. Any questions?
Yeah. Questions.
Garrett?
Yeah? Oh.
Do you want to
good.
start in the chat?
I
Or
like
do
the
you
hand
wanna
raise.
I like the
jump
hand.
out
That
the hand
was
raise?
pretty
Okay, cool.
authoritative. I liked it as well.
Yeah, so also in the earlier presentation, there was a slide where we were seeing like a product landing page for Expensify. I think right now Expensify doesn't have like a website or a landing page or anything like that. Is that true?
We do have a marketing page.
A marketing, yeah.
It's completely separate. It's on a separate subdomain. It's called use.expensify.com. We get super little traffic there. Actually, long story, but our main website is where most of our traffic goes directly.
All right, so
Yeah.
new customers don't get to your product by the marketing website? So
No,
you don't
it's
see a need for
not-
that?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so you don't see a need for having that marketing website? It's not planned in any newsletter to do that, or with the rollout of the new Expensify app, or is it?
Oh, good question. So I would say we're kind of probably testing a couple changes simultaneously. One is like right now, if you go to the landing page, it doesn't do anything. There's no marketing messages on it at all. We're actually going to start experimenting with putting marketing messages there, in addition to actually updating the marketing subdomain use.expensify.com. So those are the 2 things that we'll do. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm sure there'll be a combination as well of just like promoting what it is instead of it just being purely the sign-in. So if you saw like the old Expensify sign-up page, there are options to get to more like marketing related pages or understand what the product is about, but we don't have that for New Dot right now, you're right.
Any other hands up?
I think Ewan was next. Looked like. Uh-oh. Moderator.
All right, so with the switcher idea, you migrate all your customers at once. And did you consider like an alternative long-term slow migration approach? I imagine so. So is that a technical decision or a business one?
I think it's mainly a business decision. Specifically, we didn't really talk about it a lot, but all the old stuff will exist, including the old app. So it's just kind of confusing to talk about old, new, but what is currently like the new Expensify listing will become the old Expensify listing. And we don't really have any immediate terms. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if that list lasts a year longer still. Like, particularly with actually Block is a customer of ours, thousands and thousands of employees, like that kind of change isn't gonna happen fast. It's gonna take, basically a lot of conversations with account management, and really the same for the website, especially because, as Kevin noted, there's just a ton of functionality that's probably gonna take a year or two longer to migrate after that. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think in practice, while we'll push it fast, in practice it's going to be a much slower migration than you'd imagine, because yes, we'll point some of these admins for the first time. Inevitably, some of those things won't exist for those edge cases or larger businesses, and they'll just be stuck in their ways until we kind of can gradually convince them. So I think that's going to be a long process, even if we try to push it quickly.
And maybe actually another thing to note too is, like, we didn't talk about it too much in this presentation, but accountants are big users of our product. And I would say, like, generally speaking, they need convincing. They need to be shown that everything exists on the new and that it's better. And that's just going to take a while, given how they approach technology.
I'm actually going to let you do it now.
All right.
So for the contributors in the room, I guess, chat, requesting money, these are very kind of accessible things to understand. What should they be doing, if anything, or like thinking about when it comes to some of the more things that you had up there, like accounting integrations or per diems, or these kinds of things? Like what can they do, or should they be doing anything to kind of learn about that, or what are your thoughts there?
I think to start, a lot of the simpler, like those are kind of on the edges, right? Like I think a lot of the cases, which is really what we're trying to make this simple enough such that people who aren't in like the accounting industry or have this expertise can understand it. So I think a key will be, as we bring these features forward and we put them in the app repo and you're picking them up, is just like asking those questions, right? Like it's on us to make it as simple as possible. I would say Expensify traditionally hasn't really been that way because we've just built to scale up to more complex businesses, but we want to start there. As far as like some of those smaller edge cases, I think the same thing stands, right? Like just ask questions. Maybe we start to work through Stack Overflow a bit more thoroughly on features and things like that, which is good for internal employees. Like it's been a while since we've updated any of these features, worked on them. They've been done over years. So I think we're all starting from a pretty, like square one again.
Yeah, I guess I would also just add to that, like a lot of the core use cases, like if Expensify is your side hustle or, in your organization, like use Expensify, right? Like that's a problem with a product like this, is like a lot of people have never really done expense reports right before their first job, and things like this. So it is kind of important to like, dog food. We talked about it earlier in the week too. I think dog fooding is really important, because maybe not as much as for per diem, because that's kind of like a more complicated use case, but even just these simple use cases, distance, like it's kind of, if you don't really do this, it's hard to know what it is. And so really trying to use it for your own company as well, I think is kind of key.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Any other questions?
Hey, so the question I have is, at any given point, do you think someday we will expose our newsletter roadmap to customers so that they can see what we're working on as the highest priority next, to maybe gain interest, right? As an account manager, if I see that, Expensify is now focusing on distance, I could be more interested to see that release coming out soon. And maybe someday just have users vote on what's the most important.
I'll take this one quick. I think that's a great question. I definitely think that's the goal, and it's very part and parcel with being an open source, right? It's not a requirement, but I think it's a goal. And I would say the first thing that we can and will do is the newsletters will be coming to the app repo as a project, and anyone will be able to see basically the entirety of what that project entails. I think we're gonna start there, I think maybe the other thing is it gets a bit hazy pretty quickly. So I think that's really why we want to focus on what's coming most immediately. And I think, we want to be careful about like showing too far in the future, especially if it's a future we're not confident about. That's the balance, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's about focusing on what's actionable.
Yeah.
So like just allowing people to focus on what they can actually do something about. And then I can't help but think about us posting N7, a year and a half ago, and then telling an accountant like, oh yeah, WhatsApp quality bug 0. And they're like, what are you talking about? So like, I think we just want to avoid those kinds of conversations and setting expectations so publicly. But like in the open source community, as we start to work through this, we should totally make it, public when we understand those plans, definitely.
Is it a good one?
All right, Andrew.
Speaking of dog fooding, I would be curious, which newsletter do you think we could replace Upwork with our own Expensify payments for contributors?
I would say that probably won't even come as part of a newsletter. Like I would say we're already working on global payments. I think we talked about that on Monday, and I know there was lots of applause when we actually announced contributors requesting money in Expensify. I would say the rollout plan for that one is like, first we're going to test, with our own contractors that are in various parts of the world, and we would love to start testing right after that, really with contributors. Now, is it going to be totally smooth and bug-free? Like, probably not, but like I think that's part of dog fooding. So, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
No, yeah.
Sweet. Others?
So with the whole switcheroo thing, it sounds like there's a lot riding on it. So have you thought about doing like beta testing, like putting some users on the new features like the whole switch thing, just to get instant feedback and then do the whole switch?
Yeah, great question. I would say we probably should have made this more clear. A lot of in 7 and in 8, the whole idea of those is there's like a huge free user base that can already start using both the new website and the mobile app as soon as either in 7 or in 8. And we're going to be putting a lot of energy across the company in getting those users to switch over much faster than when we require them to. In a way, the switcheroo is probably more about how can we get early paid users in, because that's kind of the more risky part of the whole thing. And I think generally what we do across the board there is we always try to go for the simplest use cases that map kind of the financial consistency. So trying to get some contractors in first that pay us, small businesses, and move up the chain that way. The largest businesses are honestly probably a year plus away from even moving at all.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? I don't know.
No, I mean, I think a lot of the time we will, go kind of big on the change. But like I said before, the number of people that actually adapt to that change and try to figure it out always ends up being smaller than you'd expect. Like, it doesn't end up being as big as you would think. But for those people who initially come over, we're definitely going to be very close to that experience and trying to iterate on it, understanding that we're probably going to continue to nudge that use case into the new app. But that first moment is probably just where we're going to attract that initial group of customers you're mentioning.
Yep. We also have 25 more minutes, so no rush.
Keep it coming.
Up to.
Hey guys, is there a analytics division in Expensify that can kind of predict these things? So because it kind of seems like you're guessing, and you have this huge logging setup for the app, how it's used, collecting data, but which features are most used, liked, which features are most hated. So guides would probably be with clients stumbling with the same problem over and over, so what people don't like. Is it some part of Expensify that deals directly with that, so they can? What a long question, but you get the gist, yeah?
Yeah. I can take it, or you can take it first.
Go for it.
First to directly answer your question, no. There's no part of Expensify that specifically focuses on this. I would say we were probably being just brutally honest. We know these use cases. We're very confident on the use cases. Now, obviously, it's open to question, are we mimicking them in the ways that users want and expect? But I would also kind of point back to, I think that's really built into maybe we put too much emphasis on the switcheroo because nothing about this is like immediate and shocking. It's all meant to be like, you have an escape hatch and we will work with you on that, or you ultimately have a choice. That's probably a better way to say it. And so in terms of the most used features, I think that was another sub-question you had, would be around, it's literally the first features we're bringing in immediately with this N7 initiative. So just receipt scanning and distance. Again, I'm shocked how popular this distance thing is, but that and receipt scanning are, like, people are still driving a lot for work. And those two are by far the most important and the most used. So pretty simple, right, is my point.
Yeah. I would add to that a little bit. Like, while we don't have a specific team focused on that, everyone at Expensify, the 130 people, the average is like 5-year tenure, very, very experienced in expense management, managing customers. There's a lot of customer-facing people within that group. So like, yes, we have guides. Yes, we have second responders you might have met here too. But we also have our own employees in the trenches working with those customers. One additional thing that will definitely come out of this a little bit more is concierge development.
Yeah.
So we do have like an arm, which is essentially like opt in to a specific kind of conversation end user, engage with them and like better understand what the case is. And for this, that will be huge, right? Like we haven't really used that full on in quite a while because we haven't launched a ton of new features, but this will be a big question mark where everyone will get into those conversations, whether they're calls, customer conversations, escalations, things like that. Yeah.
I have a small follow-up.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
So,
Yeah.
I'm with the guys for the second responders or whatever the group is, but they're the most, hardcore users of the app, I think.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I was surprised to hear that there's this huge problem that they get a new message and the current design, that happens to me as well. So I can distinct the new message in the sidebar. So where is it? I'm looking for it. It's kind of got, and they have the same problem, and they haven't seemed to raise it already in Slack or something.
I would say like they're definitely at the bleeding edge of particularly like how we take this into more complex or just the scale, right? I would say that specific case, I mean, I've heard of it. We know about it. We're working on the performance for that.
Yeah.
And I mean, were you pointing at someone?
No, I was just
Oh,
gonna
sorry.
add, like, it's prioritization. Like, it sucks.
Yeah.
It's not better than email at all. So they're operating out of Gmail more, but we also don't really care at the moment, right? Like, we know how to build a better, like, essentially CRM email combination. That takes work. And so right now they're dealing with a lot of that, like, kind of discrepancy between the fact that we're trying to build this chat app and then we're really focused on getting our business users into this app rather than focusing on building this like sales machine. But we're well aware of like the shortcomings. It's just whether we prioritize it or a matter of when, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, it's probably a good point. Like they're pretty distinct use cases. Like we're literally building sales automation and engagement on top of NewDot. So we're just like dog fooding even more than our customer base. Like this kind of issue, our customers, like, yes, maybe you've seen it as well. Like we're all kind of power users though. The average user isn't touching this yet. Do we need to fix it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
More, okay.
So following up a little bit on your first question, do we have or is there a plan to build in at any point some sort of like reporting into the app, like figuring out how long people are spending on different things or what features they're using or something, especially as we're growing to, 1 billion, it's going to be hard to do that through customer service requests or bug reports and things like that.
I mean, my short answer to that would be, I think we have to, just on the basis of our own selves as a public company. Like we allocate basically parts of our financial statements based on how our employees spend time. So I think like, my read of that was kind of like Slack-like reporting. Is that kind of what you were getting at, or even broader as well?
Either for the customers or for us to know like how people are using the app outside of what we're hearing individually for people.
I think it's pretty required. I think traditionally we have maybe taken our stance on reporting is Well, first of all, what most people need is just super powerful and outside of really what our core market and focus is. And like there's a ton of, particularly for businesses, BI and reporting tools. But I think there's an intermediate that we'll be exploring. I don't think it's a real, we didn't put it up here because I think it's even farther out than reunification.
Not to interject, I think, Are you talking about usage data, right? So how customers are using the app.
Oh, you're talking okay, sorry, I misunderstood your
Heap,
question.
essentially.
Yeah.
And whether we'll add that in. I mean, we had Heap for a while on old dot at one point to understand how people were engaging with use dot and things like that. We haven't had it on old dot in quite a while. I hope you love problems and solutions because you might have to push that one forward. It might be tough.
Yeah.
But the thing is, this is totally different. This is new territory. It's a new app. So we're going to be very open to those new problems and not knowing things. At the moment, we don't do it, but it's really hard to say whether we'll continue to have that stance when we're trying to desperately trying to figure out how customers are engaging, how they're liking it. On old dot, we're very, very familiar. We're very close with all of the customers, tons of experience, many customers with years of paying us. But that all changes when we get to new dot. So I could see us changing that approach too.
Maybe I would even add having experience with a lot of these products before, yes, there's great insights you can find. I would argue that our experience has been their insights on the fringes. The core things, you know what you need to do, your customers tell you. You experience it yourself by dogfooding the product. So I think that's really the first line, and that's kind of what we're focused on.
Yeah.
Hi, so this is more of a user experience question, but right now all of our settings are in this right side docked modal on large screens.
Yep.
Are we going to keep all the settings in there? Because if I were an admin of a big company, I would be very frustrated that I was working in the right third of my screen only.
Yeah, we've, it's been a while now, admittedly, but we have experienced with the ability to take those settings to, if we do a 3-pane design, moving some of those settings to the middle pane. You can move in and out of those, so to your point, you get much more screen real estate. I mean, we haven't really been exploring it anytime recently, but we have explored it in the past. And to your point, it's at a certain point probably pretty inevitable, particularly if you get to Expensify and even larger size. That's a small amount for thousands of rows.
Yeah, I would just add to that, it's funny because initially when we were doing pre-designs for this very long ago for N8 free plan, right? We immediately jumped to full pane. We immediately basically brought domain control, that giant row of cards, just into new dot. And we're wow, this looks great. And then you kind of wait, who are we catering to again? And we were totally overshooting the audience. A contractor or a couple people just working on a side hustle don't need that level of reporting. So in N8, when you really think about it that way, we didn't run into this issue. We weren't undershooting that market. I think in N10, inevitably, right? Once you have reporting or filtering a bunch of rows, I could totally see us going back to that, but we just haven't run into it quite yet.
Yeah, just quick data point building on that. The way, particularly the US and really also many countries work is the SMB is where all the volume is, right? And when we say SMB, small business, we're talking about companies with 50 employees, right? It's just not a lot of data. The amount of enterprise companies in the world, right? There's the Fortune 1000. We're literally talking about small amount of companies that get quite large. So it's kind of part and parcel with the fact that they're not the focus of reunification at the moment. They come later.
Yeah.
Any other questions? We can jump to chat. Oh.
Wow.
Keep it coming.
Question from the room. A few months ago, David sent out an email to everyone saying that we have payroll. And where does that fit in our roadmap?
That's a good question. It's not really an immediate term priority. Actually, Garrett was involved as well. We did I would say the goal of that newsletter was to jumpstart market research and really learn. And I think it actually taught us a pretty valuable lesson. We currently use and have been using our own Expensify payroll product for 2+ years. It overshoots the market insanely. It's just way more complicated than most people need. Most people that we even talked to after that newsletter, they have 5 employees. They don't need employee stock option stuff going through their payroll system. It doesn't even exist. So I would say, in addition to that, specifically after the announcement, after we get reunification done, there's a whole nother roadmap about launching payroll for specifically certain types of customers, for improving invoicing and bill pay and all these other features that honestly we haven't talked about because they're kind of a V1 and not really a focus at the moment.
Yep.
So our roadmap is out 5-10 years. We just haven't gotten to that part of it yet.
What if an employee wants to submit an expense to only some admins in their company?
Well, whether they want to or not, the design is that it's shared with the company. So, I mean, I don't know what to say other than
We'd love
it's
your
the company's
feedback,
choice.
but we're going to do it anyway. Okay, cool. Moving on to another. Are we at all concerned that current users will reject business chat in total and churn?
I mean,
Yes.
Yes.
it's a possibility, absolutely. Are we super concerned in a world where they still have the old app to use and have plenty of time to decide what to, I mean, yes, it's absolutely part of the bet, I would say.
Sure.
I'm personally not super concerned. Maybe I'm overly confident that we have a feedback mechanism and all that stuff and time on our side. But yes,
Yeah.
it's a real thing.
I think, yeah, it's kind of like what David said the other day. Like, I think that the failure of it is inevitable at the start. Like, there is no doubt that what we were initially building is not going to totally work, and we're going to have to figure it out from there. But if we have the fallback, if we can kind of coach them through it and learn what's not working, I'm very confident it will eventually work. It's just going to take a lot of iterations.
We've also created a pretty large customer-facing organization to actually work with them one-on-one because
Yeah.
you're never going to get it right.
Yeah,
So there's that.
never going to be perfect.
That was the last one.
Cool.
Closing remarks?
Let's get to work. I
Thank
don't
you.
know.
All right. So we've got lunch in about 10 minutes. After that, we'll be back here for a hackathon where everybody tries to do a custom emoji of me in Nudot. Pretty excited to see what you guys come out with there. So I'll see you guys back here in about an hour.
Yes.